Welcome, everyone, to the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival, one of the world's largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education, we call it SAGE in Miami, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Carly Orshan, and I'm the Director of Teen Education and Engagement at SAGE and the Miami March of Living program. I'm excited to be here and to really moderate this conversation and this virtual discussion with Director Elena and Executive Producer of the lesson Zeid. Thank you both for being here, and we're excited because this year we'll be premiering your film at the festival. I want to start off by just asking you both about a little bit about who you are, sharing, a little bit about who you are, what got you into film, and your process, where you're calling from. We're all from different places. I'm calling from Miami Beach, so it's nice to kind of just learn a little bit about you before we dive fully in.
Go ahead, Zeid.
Elena, you were the director. No, it's your creation, please.
So I'm calling from Berlin. I'm in Germany at the moment, and I grew up here, not in the city. I grew up in a small town. It's more village, really. It's called Ostbüren, and I wasn't sure that I'm going to be a filmmaker one day. I just knew I would love to be a journalist, and then it became in image. It turned out later, and so I studied in Cologne and in Paris, and later came to London in order to become a documentary filmmaker. And I mainly work for Arte, which is a cultural channel between France and Germany, but also for the BBC, for The Guardian. And the lesson was my very first film ever, my first film idea I ever had. So you also see me a bit my journey as a documentarian in this movie. Yes, because I've made many films since, but this was really my first one.
That's great. I'm excited that we get to see that and be a part of it. Zeid, what about you?
So I'm Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein. I used to be the UN Human Rights Chief, and I teach human rights law at the University of Pennsylvania, where I bumped into an old friend of mine who also is a friend and a producer of this movie and a friend of Elena's. And there was a showing of a shorter documentary on the integration of refugee families in Europe. And it was a delicious little documentary. It was simple yet profound, and I was taken by it. And our mutual friend said to me, "We have another documentary. We're still producing it. We're in post-production. Would you like to have a look?" And it was The Lesson. And I found it an incredibly important film, this. It is deceptively sort of simple and yet not, because it delivers sort of these little punches throughout and shocks you when you assume that you understand where the text or where the narrative is going. And so I then met Elena, and basically I was drafted into this as a willing companion, because I believe it to be a very important film, and I think it needs to be seen and understood in the context of what we're seeing worldwide, with the increased anti-Semitism, the increased hatreds that we see, polarization. It is so important that we understand what this film is trying to deliver, and so I happily joining forces with Elena and our friends in promoting it.
That's great, and I think this is really important work. We do similar work in Miami at Sage with the Marshall Living Program. We educate high school seniors, Jewish high school seniors, about the Holocaust. And if you aren't familiar with the program, it culminates. There's a 6-month educational program that culminates in traveling to Poland and Israel to bear witness and to really understand the Holocaust. And most importantly, one of our biggest goals is to teach students to become upstanders, to stand up against injustices that they see, whether it is anti-Semitism or other injustices, which there are certainly many in our society, to be able to know the skills of how to advocate for those that are marginalized. And so that's a really big part of the education that we do. And I was really, I think, Zed, you said it really well. There's so many little moments that happen in the film that kind of are very profound and shock you. And I want to ask you all, what is your overall take, or what is your goal of getting this information out into the community? What would you like to see happen with this knowledge about how education is being done in these smaller communities?
Yeah, the intention of the film really changed over time. I was not. I first I thought I'm going to make a film about the way this feeling, the sensation of the culture of guilt is being established within a population, because I felt it so profoundly. So I thought, well, probably a lot of people will go through this process. How does this actually work? To feel for something that is so far in the past. And so I thought, I'm not going to make a film about that. And that's how I started. And then everything changed, because it was not at all like I remembered it. It was the children perceived the right absolutely different, and not like this baseball bat throwing skinheads that we maybe picture if we think about neo-Nazis today. But it was the kids saw them as sophisticated, as clever, good communicators, somebody who really gives an alternative reading to what is true and what not. So this authority of the teacher was not guaranteed at all. So then there was the second biggest decision to make in the film. The question was, are we gonna focus on what people are trying to do with the education they are providing, or not? And I decided to just stick to the children and their experience. And that's was so difficult, I must say, because it wasn't, for example, when they were going to Sachsenhausen, of course, I expected, or I thought they're going to have this profound experience. And just seeing what is actually happening, that they have super short amount of time, they run through there. If there had been a traffic jam, they wouldn't have even gone. Like this very realistic, normal, everyday life in a comprehensive school in Germany, which then has such massive effects, of course, because probably they will not have another chance to go, except they are very motivated and do it themselves. So I wanted to bring that to the surface. What is their experience, without judging them for choosing the wrong words, for example, because they say, for example, I imagine a concentration camp to be like an old people's home. So I was, of course, what a comparison. How can you say that in the first moment when I heard that? But then I thought, maybe that's the first image she has in her mind of people not being free. And so that was her approach. and not judging her for that. That was really something I tried to do in the documentary. And now, looking in what's happening with the film, there's something really, really, really wonderful that just happened yesterday, basically, that the ministry that is trying to guarantee the quality of the teaching in Germany contacted me to say, we want to show your film to our teachers.
Wow.
Because and that was such great news, because it's I think it's very moving when the children watch it and they see themselves, and they see themselves maybe also being cowards. I think that is very effectful. But on the other hand, when the teachers see it and they are understanding once more what it means to go through this process as a teenager, that I think then we already reached a very important goal of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting how the goals shifted and changed. Zed, do you have anything to add to that process and what your process was, to support Elena within that context?
I mean, it is, there's so many parts of this which are fundamental. Germany has long been praised in the post-war years for coming to terms with the enormity of the wickedness that was the Shoah, the persecution, and then the whole idea of a genocide that was sort of almost mathematically run, the efficiency of it, so evil, and the crime so colossal. And Germany rightly was praised for doing the correct thing. It took time, because after Nuremberg, it took time before we got to the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, and there was the Ulm trial before that. But in terms of the education, it was moving in the right direction when you compare it to the rest of Europe, which was, appalling in terms of trying to address their complicity in the commission of this colossal crime. And then let alone other countries who can't even get close to looking at their own histories in a manner that's fair. And you see in this country the divergent narratives when it comes to race, and how difficult it is to deal with the forces of hatred. And the point that Elena was raising, that you have alternative worldviews that are completely not linked to reality. They fit some sort of ideological purpose. And the only antidote to this is to instill a sort of moral courage in people to do the right thing. But I can tell you also, moral courage requires consistency. If you're not consistent across the board, you're part of the problem. And so it's hard to do it. It really is. And so the teaching of courage takes time, patience, and as Elena was saying, it cannot be just a tick the box sort of flippant exercise. You're asked to do it by the Ministry of Education. You run through 4 years, and it has to be much deeper. And I think the point she raised about the visit to Sachsenhausen, when I, at the invitation of the Auschwitz Institute, spent a few days at the camp in 2013, I think I was one of the first Arab diplomats ever to go. I mean, I felt physically sick for the days I was there. And the idea you have a backpack and you quickly take notes as just a school trip to a museum, it's not that. It's not that. And so the thought that it may not be working in Germany, it sends sort of shivers down one's spine, because they're at the forefront of trying to deal with these issues. Well, if they can't make it work, then what about the rest of the world? And how is it going to ever transcend the bestiality of humankind and become something better than that? And so the lessons are fundamental. I think it's crucially important, and I'm delighted to hear that in Berlin, the Ministry of Education wants to seize on Elena's movement, because it is very important. And it's important that other countries take note, because again, if Germany's struggling with it, then what about everyone else? I mean, the universal message is clear. It cannot be allowed to happen again in any context. I mean, we have to be better than this as human beings. And I hope that as this movie is seen, as this film is seen by more and more people, you identify yourself. A human rights person is a person that stands up to bullies. It's hard to do because you can get hit as well. So it does require some fortitude, and you have to be able to do this. And so the more I became involved, the more I thought this has to be seen. Finally, there was one in our own early exchanges. I was saying to Elena, had she spoken to Nicholas Frank, the son of Hans Frank, a former governor of Poland who was hanged at Nuremberg, because he's been warning German youth for years and years. And Elena said to me that she saw, Elena, you may want to say this, that you saw somewhere written, or Hans himself saying, or Nicholas himself saying, that he could imagine, given the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany, that his father is smiling. So the dangers are very real. We have to take these issues extremely seriously.
And I also think that in what I really felt very strongly in the process of making the film in Germany, that this idea of, why do you want to make a film on this topic? Like, what is there left to say? Why? And also a little bit of arrogance of the older generation, who's saying, why do young people now think it's necessary to make a piece of art or a piece of journalism about this? And above all in the beginning, where I didn't have footage yet, when I didn't know, is it going to work or not, it was very discouraging. So and then on top of it, there is this whole practicalities, of course. Can you film somebody? Can you film in a classroom where maybe young people are expressing anti-Semitic views, and keep that forever in a film? And a lot of teachers were very afraid of this. And I didn't foresee that, but the teachers, they already know that there's a lot of people who are where the cause is already lost.
Wow. And so what do they even do at that, at that point? And it's just there, I feel like there's a call for an intervention, and I don't know what it looks like, it's everywhere. I'm not just saying from that one school that we saw, it's around the world. And I don't know exactly what it looks like. After my takeaway after watching the film, I was like, okay, can I create a lesson, like create Holocaust education? Can I send it to Germany? Can I send it to other communities? Florida has a mandate for Holocaust education in the state, and has certain standards for it. And I was like, I need to be more familiar. What are the standards everywhere else? And are the teachers actually meeting the standards? Because the problem is that's from the government. And then once you get into the classroom, it looks different. And from a personal anecdote, I'm completing my PhD in education, and I have a colleague in my coursework who teaches Holocaust education, not Jewish, and doesn't have a background of Holocaust education. It's the mandate that she has to teach it. And, she struggles with it. She showed me what she taught, and for me, I was like, oh, that's what they're doing, and trying not to judge. I'm just like, okay, well then how is this going to change? How is this going to change people and really make a difference? And so when I saw this film, that's what I saw, that there's a call to action. So it's really amazing that the ministry is thinking of using it. And I'm curious to know, what are the follow-up steps after the teachers watch that film? And if you guys have, I mean, you just obviously found out a few days ago, so congratulations on that. But then that's my next question to you two. You know, what else could potentially be done with this? Where could you see it going for in terms of follow-up for making that change? Is this the first of larger thinking, or of other film ideas? You know, where are you two at with that process?
Zaid and
mean,
we were always talking about this, about
yeah,
this about this question: who does it help to have a different view again? Because I think when you are in the process, when you are in this teaching circle, when you have to, for example, you're a history teacher, yes, but then you have cuts. That's history is one of the classes, at least in Germany, that gets skipped most of the time. And then you have also to cover politics and geology and all of these things. And above all, in Germany, we really have this tendency of loving to give money to mathematics, to this kind of science, and we're lacking the resources for the humanities.
yeah.
And so we were always debating where can this what wheels can we turn in order to improve the situation, because it's so complex. And everybody who says the message is never again, it's easy, has never thought about it. Has never thought about it, and it's very lazy to say, well, the message is there, what's the problem?
Yeah. No, I mean, in a world that celebrates superficialities from Instagram images and marketing techniques and public relations to solve everything, we need media that makes us think more deeply and reflect more deeply with precision. And Elena's point about inherited guilt, I think, is part of the problem. If the teacher is not properly equipped to impart this knowledge, the feeling is that the individual is somehow guilty for the crimes of their forebears. Of course, in human rights law, it's not the case. If your father or mother was a murderer, it doesn't make you a murderer. You are innocent under the law. But the community has a responsibility. The community, the descendants of the forebears, have a responsibility to make sure it never happens again. And that's the responsibility that has to be imparted. If the teacher, as Elena was saying, is lazy, sloppy, undermotivated, underpaid, whatever, and is just making the students feel guilty, the opposite effect will take place. And so it requires understanding of the facts, a deep empathy with the suffering of all those families who lost and were lost in the Shoah, and to convey that empathy. I mean, that one scene when the teacher, can we call him Mr. Heller, was pointing to the way in which the towers were placed at Sachsenhausen for utmost efficiency. I mean, that's precisely the sort of cold-hearted logic that maybe the Nazis admired themselves for, but it's hardly something that we can sort of point out. I mean, it was a chilling moment there, and I'm sure he didn't really think about it in that sense, but it comes across that the efficiency almost eclipses the horror of the reality that was the camp. So it's a very profound movie out there, and I don't want to denigrate other movies, but we have a lot of rubbish documentaries. This is in a class of its own, and it's a very serious and very important film. And it's not because Elena and I, she's created it and I'm supporting it. It really is fundamentally important. There is also a scene, I don't know, Elena, do you want, everyone, of course, would have caught on to this with Lily, who is just about to turn 18, discovers her grandfather was an SS general. I mean, that was quite striking. And she didn't really almost have the emotional tools with which to cope with that fact. Yeah, Elena?
Yes, yes. Um, Concerning the teachers, I always think it's so easy to just say this, they're bad lessons or they're not doing a good job, because there's so much more to like so many more factors who are teaching. It is media, it's online, it's the families, it's the football coach like we see in the film. And that's why I wanted to be very attentive also in the documentary, not to accuse a teacher or not to point out you're doing a bad lesson, because that's not the issue. The issue is way more complex and has more layers, even though I do believe that a good teacher can really change a life. And with Lily, I was I mean, even though we have been going in and out of that house for years working on this film, this information only came pretty late, when the father felt like she daughter can also should know or can cope with it. And what I found interesting is her reaction. She is very enlightened amongst the other students. So, but still in that moment she decided, well, maybe I believe him and he didn't know anything. So if it touches your own family, it overrides whatever you learned so quickly.
Yeah, I think, there's so much nuance to this. You're explaining like this larger issue. And Lily's experience shows that a little bit, just that. Um, and I think mentioning the ability to cope and process is something that is difficult for teenagers in general. That's my specialty, Gen Z in particular. Understanding, how to build resilience for teenagers and their coping mechanisms. One of the things that we do in our education is actually building how do you process trauma? How do you cope with grief? How do you duel your feelings? And it's so, I think, because of the culture, Elena, of what you were saying, of being ingrained in that guilt, that's even more complex than ever. That is probably really hard for many communities to understand, or individuals to understand. So I think that there's a lot that could be done with that, and helping the students, helping the teachers, uh, um, to hopefully grow, and learn from the process. I'm curious, you've already shared a few anecdotes, and I really love hearing them about your process. Are there any other anecdotes, while filming, or, moments that really are so profound for you both about the film that you'd like to talk about or share?
One of my favorite scenes of the film, which came like a present from the sky, because that is the magic of filmmaking sometimes. What technique that we used, so Alessandro and I were thinking about how can we make the kids be kids without us being so intrusive. And so we sometimes set up the camera and left. And so there's this conversation between Lily and Alex. They are just turned 14, and they are trying to figure out where their family was standing at the point of the war. And they are thinking, and they're like, I think my mom was born in the Second World War. No, maybe Third World War. So it just shows that we're not born with the knowledge. Like we are learning about it. And if it is the and if it comes so late at 14, and we have heard bullying and anti-Semitic screams or anti-Muslim screams in the stadium already since we're 8, then I think the argument of saying we have to protect and we have to protect the children because they are too young for the horrors that are being displayed. If you show images or something, I really don't think that that is the case. If they are ready to experience racism or to repeat it just from hearing it, then they are ready to learn about this chapter of German history. And that's the only that's why I would always advocate to also use more documentary footage today, real footage, not rely so much on fiction, because it makes it so easy to say, well, that's invented, it's an American story, so why should I believe that? Why should I use this as a source of my understanding of World War II? So I really would. That's why I also think the archive footage, finding the archive footage, was very precious, because it was so normal. It was not Napola school or Hitler Youth. It was just a normal school, and that happened all over Germany like this. And it makes it a bit more approachable for the kids to see where their life would have been, like at 14, but in 1938, for example. So I really, if that is also something that comes from this film, the willingness and the bravery to use original footage, not fictionalized footage, that would be a dream for me as well.
Yes, I think Elena's use of that original footage can, in the way that the Nazis curated the educational curriculum, I think for many people, this will, unless they've lived it or are close to it, be new information. The way that immediately the curriculum was at the forefront of the Nazi plan, so to speak, in terms of shaping opinion from there on out. When I first received the rough cut, it was late in the evening. I was about to go to sleep. I thought, okay, I'll have a quick look. And the opening scenes are so lyrical. I mean, it's sort of, Elena has this talent for combining art with something very disturbing. So the initial scene, Elena, and you describe your conversation, very casual conversation with your American friend, and who makes that comment, and it just shook you. And then I couldn't stop watching, and I watched it. And it was really late at night. I think my wife was furious that I wasn't going to bed and staying up watching it. But again, I think the broader import of it is that the curriculum must draw out of us such a deep empathy and understanding that no matter what our technical achievements as human beings, no matter how great we are in terms of divining new digital sort of means by which we can organize our lives, we will always remain very primitive and small if we're capable of doing these sorts of things. And unless we somehow transcend it, we cannot claim some mantlehood of, superiority as a species. I mean, by what measure? Simply because we've created a new phone or a new means of communication? Or, I mean, it's bizarre to imagine that. And we're facing existential threats as it is, from climate change. We see the pandemic that's forced us all. This is going to reoccur more often than we probably dare think. And so we must sort our human to human relations out, and just cannot continue, squabbling, fighting, killing each other, torturing each other. That all has to sort of come to an end. And if through the use of a talented director's lens, we can shape opinion in that direction, it has a huge potential contribution to make in not just Holocaust education, but human rights education writ large. We cannot discriminate on the basis of religion, ethnicity, color. We cannot move in that direction. It's people make sort of light of remarks that are seen to be bigoted or racist, and they say, oh, I can't even joke again, I can't even say something about my Arab neighbor. And you're saying, well, it's not that. You can say whatever you like on the law, on the human rights law, you can say that. The trouble is, who can trust you if you're in a position in a company, in a firm, to make a decision, and you have people of various ethnic minorities or ethnic backgrounds who can say that your bias is not going to play a part in this? And who wants to be part of a biased organization or company or bank or, so I mean, all of this needs a saner discussion. And for that reason, I think this documentary in particular requires really almost careful study, because it's deceptive. I was sitting there, you're watching these teenagers running around, and it's reminiscent of my own children in and out of the house all the time. But what Elena's done is something, I think, the media should have been all over this well before Elena had brought it to light. But maybe it takes a gifted documentary maker to do this for us, because it's not daily froth. She's really conveying the struggle with which the German government seems to be having with imparting Holocaust education. And again, if they're having trouble with it, goodness knows the rest of the world and other countries who can barely cope with, looking at their past realistically and sort of fairly, it speaks to the challenge that we all face.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the challenge of the past and our present realities of what's going on in our communities. And
yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that,
just seeing Carly, that the people who stormed Congress on the 6th of January, carrying all sorts of Nazi symbols, not all of them, I mean the worst of them, genocidal symbols, and you think, but how can it be? 21st century, and Germany, the US, many parts of the world. I mean, how can it be?
yeah.
We need to change it.
And I think that you guys, you're on the right side of trying to change some things. And something that we say in Hebrew, kol hakavod, a job well done, with intention and with awareness of trying to really bring something to light, and something that you should be proud of. So we're really honored at the film festival this year to be able to premiere the film, and I personally hope that it gains a lot of traction, because the message is so important to where we're going, and what we need within our society to bring that sense of awareness as we move forward. So I want to thank you both so very much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to get to know you, and to be able to share and learn more about the film and your process, and to be able to just have this time. So thank you both, and thank you to all of our members, our sponsors, our community partners, especially SAGE, the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for all of your support. And a big thank you to our audience that will be watching this, for participating in the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.